Responsive typography is hard enough out of the box, but we can also run into problems with it when the context that items are placed in changes, where sometimes it might have a lot of room to live, sometimes that same element we want to use it somewhere else, it has less room to live, but then in that second context the font size isn't big enough or things just get thrown out of whack. It's not a lot of fun. Luckily, we have Typetura that is here that can solve this problem and do a lot more. Hello my front-end friends and welcome back to another video. I'm so glad that you've come to join me once again, and if you're new here, my name is Kevin, and here at my channel I hope you fall madly, deeply in love with CSS, and if I can't get you to fall in love with it, I'm hoping to at least help you be a little bit less frustrated by it. And we're going to do that today by actually adding in a little tool that does use a bit of JavaScript, which is Typetura, but it's a really awesome tool that solves some problems that we currently have that we can't actually solve in other ways. And while a lot of the problems that Typetura does solve are actually going to be handled a bit by container queries, and more specifically I think container units or the query units. We don't have access to those yet. We don't know how long it's going to be. But with Typetura, you can actually change easing of things as well and do a bit more and link it into other places. It's a really, really cool tool that I've been really having some fun with lately. So let's dive in and take a look at how it works. All right, so here's a layout that I made a little while back that I thought was pretty fun. And it's one of those ones where it's with grid. So like the items are always changing. These cards are different, like changing sizes sort of as we go. And a lot of this is dynamically happening without any media queries or anything. So I don't always explicitly know what size things are going to be, or even as the screen gets smaller, sometimes the cards are actually bigger because of how Grid's figuring out these columns and everything for me. And that's super useful, and this intrinsic layout type thing is really, really handy. But the problem with this is it's hard to know how big I need my font sizes to be. And so when I created this, I took a really simple approach for this. This is like my featured card. And so if we go and take a look at VS Code, all I did was I left the font sizes all the same. And then in a media query, I said, when that sort of kicked in, I'm just going to make the font size on it bigger. And while that works, it's not very satisfying. And of course, some people will go, so, we could use clamp instead. But if I come in and use clamp on this, I run into a big problem, which is here, as this is getting smaller, like that doesn't look good. And I guess I could put my clamp in a media query, but it's still like, these, like here, this card's actually bigger than it is here, just because of, again, the intrinsic layout that's happening. And it would be really nice if this font size was actually more linked to the size of the container it's inside of and not to my viewport, which is always one of the problems we've had with viewport units. So let's go and see how we can solve this with Typetura. So I'm just going to open up their website, which is right here. And so yeah, there's the Typetura site, and they give you a nice demo. You can play around with some stuff here. And I actually got inspired a little bit by this layout to make that one that we did. But let's go over to here and see a little bit of how we can get started with it. And actually we'll go here, getting started. Which is really easy to do. You just go to here and download the version of Typetura. So you just click there, download it, and you can see I've already grabbed it there. But you just add it into your files. And let's actually just copy this because I haven't done that yet. Go over to my HTML file and we're just going to paste that in right here. It does mention in their documentations that this should be in the head of your document and not at the bottom like you might do with script tags. And it does mention for better performance, and some people might be going, well, there's some JavaScript here in my head, but because it is dealing with the paint of your layout, because it's going to change font sizes and do some other stuff, it's actually a little bit more beneficial here to maybe render block slightly than to get these big jumps in content after the fact. And it shouldn't really slow things down. It's actually a pretty speedy little guy. And of course here now we have a scripts directory, so we just want to drop that out. And in my case, I've just dropped this right into my in the root folder. But if you have somewhere else that you want to put it, put it in the appropriate place, and you might have a bundle or whatever it is. But just for a quick demo here, I'm just going to drop it right in the root. So just make sure that you link the path. So let's go in and check out what's happening in there. And it's actually, and the way Typetura is built is actually using keyframe animations, which is a really clever approach. Everything is based on animations, and that means it can see the size of things, but the growth curves are all based on keyframe animations, like CSS keyframe animations. And it's using custom properties to let us go into these and sort of tweak things a little bit. But we need to create a name and there are default properties for all of these. So as we can see, there's no default value for the name, but there is a default value for the max, the ease, and the bind as well. So position of the animation. And we're going to sort of dive in and customize things a little bit. And before we get worried about defining contexts, we're going to go actually and jump over to component styles. And then we're going to go back to the defining context after. So here in the component styles, it shows us how we can sort of create some things. And I'm going to do it very similar to what I did before, where if we come back here, this clamp I did is let's actually comment this font size out, and let's come in here and create a keyframe. So we're going to do keyframes, and we'll call this card titles. And now in my clamp, I had gone with these two sizes here. So I can just take those two sizes. I do a 0%. I want my font size to be 1.25 rem. And we can just duplicate that line. We can make this one 100%, and I want my font size. I'm going to boost it up a little bit here just for demo purposes so we can really see it in action, but maybe we'll adjust it a little bit once if we see that it's breaking things a little bit. But just for a demo, I think making it a bit more of an extreme use case can be kind of useful. And we're not actually going to come in and use the animation like that. Like, we've set keyframes, you might be thinking you want an animation. But what we want to instead do is go back to that naming we saw before using the custom properties, where I'm going to come in and do my TT key. And so we're going, what's my TT key? And then we take the card titles and we put that right there. And Typetura is smart enough to know that this means go grab this and use this for the animation, and it's going to do it for my font sizes like that. And actually, before we dive in and take a look, just to see if things are actually working, one thing that's really interesting with Typetura is you're not limited to font sizes. You can actually apply anything you want to it here as long as it's an animatable property. So one animatable property is color, and I think this is going to help us see this working. So we're going to do a color and fire brick, so it's staying at the same sort of starting point. But we're going to switch that over to a color here of steel blue. And so it should change. If this is working, not only will the font size change, but the color will change from red to blue. And while I wouldn't use this for a real typographic system, I think it's a bit of an interesting thing you can do just to make sure things are working or see how far things are actually going through your system when you're testing things out. All right, so with that done, everything is saved. Let's go and check out the browser now. And look at that, the text is actually blue. And as this is changing size, see how it's going into purples, and then as it gets smaller and smaller and smaller, we get more and more into the red. And then again, as we go this way, and you'll notice here, like the font size now, and then as we go more and more and more, it's getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and it's getting more and more blue. The only problem right now is it's not linked to its parent here, it's linked to the context of the viewport. So I could have done this with viewport units. The color wouldn't be able to shift, but the font size change that I'm currently making, it's not actually doing very much. So let's fix that. And the easiest way to fix that to start with, I wouldn't necessarily recommend this, but one way you can do it is by using so this is my card, stacked, featured. On here, I'm going to add a Typetura class. And the Typetura class here, this is the sort of default way that you can add a context. And that means anything that's in here will look at the size of this div here. So it's going to look at, so in this case, I'm doing it on my card title and it's living inside of here. So it's going to look at the context of this page to be able to work. So let's hit save on that and let's jump back on over to Firefox. And now notice how it's not as big as it was before. It's actually pretty small now. And then as this gets smaller and smaller and smaller, it will keep shrinking down. But it's never reaching that high end that we had it reaching before, because the max size that it was looking for before was 1600 pixels, and it's getting nowhere close to 1600 pixels now. It's maybe what, 400 or 500 pixels across. So you can see it is changing color. It's gotten a little bit bigger, but it's not getting huge, huge, huge. So in something like this, we maybe want to make that sort of jump a little bit more extreme. So we can come back over to my CSS. And here where I did my TT key, we set card titles, but this is another one of those keys that we could put in where we can set a different maximum range. So we can actually say TT max, and we can set something. And when we set the TT max, if you want 500, I'm going to go with 500 pixels just to give it a number that I think will work here, but you don't actually do 500 pixels, it's unitless. So you just say 500 and that's going to mean that it's 500 pixels. So we'll do the 500 and let's go back over to Firefox and we can see, look at that, it's huge now. And then as it shrinks down in size, it's changing over. But here we should see it a little bit more extreme where it's getting smaller. And then here it should jump and it gets bigger again. So as the context changes and as that parent size is adjusting, the whole thing is adjusting, which is pretty cool. So already I see like a nice thing that's coming in here. Another thing that's driving me a little bit nuts is I think at the small screen sizes, or like if I'm looking at the very small sizes, I actually think it's working. Like if I look at this font size, I actually think it's working pretty good. But at the larger font sizes, the line height here is a little off. So we will make a change there as well, where I'm going to do here, we'll leave this by itself. But at the 100%, when the font size is getting bigger, the line height can also get shrunk down to like a 0.9 maybe. And this is very dependent on your fonts, but now we can see it's a nice tight font size on there. And then as I shrink this down more, the font size is actually, the line height is actually increasing on it a little bit, which just, I think it works pretty well. And that's one of those things with fonts. The bigger your font size, the less line height that you want. And that's especially true if it's all cap text. You can actually go pretty tight when you have all caps, once you get into the big font sizes. So that's all working, but imagine I wanted, ideally that's actually working on all of these cards now. And that could run us into an issue where we don't want to have to come and add that Typetura class every single place that we want to use it. Kind of annoying, right? And luckily we don't have to do that though. So I'm going to delete that from there. And what I'm going to do is actually come all the way up to here. And for this demo and for simple purposes, we're just going to drop what we're going to do right here in the head. And that's because when we go over, we're going to go back over to the defining context now, which I skipped before. And so this is where it does talk about using the class of Typetura if you want to just throw it in there. But you can actually come in and create your own new contexts as well. So, that's kind of cool. And just so we don't have to reinvent the wheel, let's come here and copy this. And we're going to do it just as an embedded script tag like their demo shows. But obviously you could do this with your own your own script tag that you're then bringing in or linking to just before, as long as you're linking it before Typetura's one. This is really important that this comes before this one, whether it's your own script tag or you're just doing it sort of like this. And, article section aside, I think a lot of these actually make sense. The Typetura is the default, so you don't really need that in here. But what I'm going to do is just come in here and do a dot card. And you will notice I am putting the dot. The selector is important here. If it's a class, it's a dot. Or if it's an element, then you put in exactly how you would write your selector in your CSS. And by doing that, and I'm going to hit save there, and let's come back over to here. And now, instead of doing this on my card featured card title, where it's only looking at that one, I can use the same thing across all of them. And I told you 3 was a bit big, so let's drop this back down to the 2 rem that I originally had. Or maybe a 2.25 or something. Let's see what that's going to look like. And notice, look, none of them are the same color anymore. And we get this where all of these are using the same font size declaration, technically speaking. They're all using that Typetura class that we were just looking at, and it's all the same selector. So that means at this size, they're all the exact same size. But as it gets bigger, and then here, again, they all look the same. But now, because this one has more space to live than these other ones, it's actually setting things up a little bit differently. It has that larger font size on there. So it becomes very related to the context of where that is living rather than the size of the viewport, which is just absolutely wonderful. And obviously, as I said, we wouldn't actually be coming in and changing the color, but I like showing that things are changing by seeing the colors shift and things like that. And I'm going to shrink that down a little bit because I think it's going to look a little bit better. Another thing that is kind of important here is, JavaScript's disabled or who knows what it is, but you can come in and actually just declare a font size as well. So let's say I came in and let's just do it here with a really big number. So font size of 10 rem to see what happens. Don't do this, but 10 rem. And if I come back, we'll notice that they're not actually using that 10 rem. They're actually using the Typetura font sizes. They're all red because I took the colors off, but the Typetura sizes are still working. And just to show you that they are working, let's go look at the dev tools here. So we'll do an inspect on this guy. And if I go and look at this H2, you can see that the font size here, it's actually saying 10 rem, but you can see it's actually 27.532 pixels because it's Typetura playing with it. And actually, if we do this, you can see it's adjusting as I'm changing my viewport. And so what that means is you can bring in fallbacks for this. So if it doesn't work, you could leave a clamp here, or you could just come in and leave a 1.75 rem or another value here as a fallback for what the eventual property will end up being. And so that way, at least you know that if JavaScript's not loading for some reason, or there's other issues, that at least you'll have a nice, decent sort of style. And then if Typetura does come in, that you'll get a nice experience with it. And there's some really other cool ideas and cool things you can do with this, as I mentioned. And it even talks about that a little bit here in their documentation. where they talk about custom contexts and inputs. And one of the ones they give here is you can give custom context to store value with the CSS property, so that with the TT bind property. And so you can even see here, so if it's 72 degrees Fahrenheit, you can query that temperature and use it as a context by adding the style TT bind 72 to the parent element. And so you can actually, like, I was changing font sizes, but maybe you have something that's bound to colors, and that way you can actually have colors for, like, you have you're showing different temperatures, and if it's really cold, it's blue. If it's warmer out, it goes into maybe like a nice orange or something. If it's really hot out, it turns into a really bright red or something like that. So you're not limited to just font sizes. You can actually dive a lot deeper into how you can create something like this, which is really, really cool. But there is another thing I want to look at. We're not going to do that exactly here, but one thing I do want to look at, and another one of the things that we can come into, is the easing. And actually, to see the easing in action, we should probably come back and add the colors back in here, and maybe bring this back up to a 3. So let's do our color, we'll just do blue and then red here, color red. And here we're gonna come in with the TTEs. And the default is linear, which just means it's going to go from the minimum to the maximum linear animation. And so we can actually come in with our own curves here to modify how the growth is going to happen. And this is one of those things that's still going to keep Typetura set apart when we have query units for typography, is being able to do stuff like this. Because I think for headlines, you actually can accelerate the growth of them a little bit, whereas maybe regular text, you want it more linear, or maybe you even want it to slow and then sort of do a quick growth closer to the end. And so I'm just going to hit save here, and we're going to go back to Firefox, and we're going to go back to our dev tools. So let's open those up, and you can see that the sizes have gotten a bit bigger. And actually, let's set my dev tools here, and we're going to bring this over to the side here, because I want to take a look at, I don't need this, I want this side where we have the keyword linear. And this way we can sort of see everything in action. I guess I could have just docked my dev tools, but whatever. Linear, let's just change this to an ease. And already, you see I broke it now because the ease isn't working, but we can come in with ease. And we're gonna see that, actually, let's just look at that and then linear. And you'll notice these are actually smaller right now because we can see that they're less red. Whereas when I go with the basic ease function, it's one of the default functions, you can see they've already gotten a lot bigger. And so it's actually a lot more aggressive because remember, it's starting at 0. So it's gotten to this larger size much faster because the ease function is sort of doing one of those S's where we're speeding things up. Now it'd be nice here. Let's come in and we're going to go to cubic Bezier CSS. I think that should bring up cubicbezier.com. There we go. So this is probably the easiest thing to do, is just come in with your own timing function. Let's say we wanted to grow really fast and get up to that size, like, so we want to get to, like, actually, let's do it the other way. Let's go where it's going to start and like stay really small, and then all of a sudden get really big. So we're going to copy this here, and we're just going to come to my TTEs here and paste that cubic Bezier in. Let's come back and notice how they're blue. That means they're super small. It's as small as they're going to get. And then all of a sudden, like, see, like they're small, and then woof, all of a sudden they're full size. And then woof, it doesn't quite get there, but you can see it makes it much more dramatic. We're staying small, and then all of a sudden we're really big because it's following this growth of stay small, go big, and then stay small. And of course you could do it more like this, and you could come in with your own, let's copy that one, paste it in, and then go check that version out. So now it should take a lot longer to get big, but when it gets big, all right, look, eventually it can get big. But it's either small or big. We're almost doing it like a switch because I've made it so aggressive on the curve there. Of course, you could come in with more of an S curve and play around with these a little bit and sort of come up with something and have some fun with it. And this is honestly one of those things that's really cool, I find, for headlines especially. And actually, I think I'm causing some overflow happening right now because my text is too long. So that's one thing to definitely avoid. But these curves are really interesting ways that you can play with your typography and get really cool things to happen. And as I said before, there's also really other cool, awesome things that you can do with Typetura. So I'd really encourage you trying it out, playing around with it, having some fun with it. And if you'd rather, instead of worrying about the typography specifically, but you want to see how I created this layout, you can watch how I did that in this video that is right here. And with that, I want to say a very big thank you to my supporters of Awesome over on Patreon, Jan, Johnny, Stuart, and Tim, as well as all my other patrons for their monthly support. And of course, until next time, don't forget to make your corner of the internet just a little bit more awesome.